man, before we get into the Solitaire Suite, I want to kind of ask you about when we look at the calendar right now. 4 years ago, everything came to a halt with the pandemic. How did you
Yeah.
survive it, and how did it change you?
Well, I teach as well. Like a lot of musicians, I have a support job, so I educate as well. So when the music world shut down, I was lucky enough to still have my teaching positions to support me through it. I actually really loved the beginning of the pandemic because it opened up all this time. I haven't practiced that much since I was at North Texas. Like I would teach a class online and turn around and practice for a couple hours and then teach another class online and then turn around and practice. So I actually, for the first month or so, really, really enjoyed the pandemic because it just opened up all this free time. As
Yeah.
it wore on and the finances started hitting a little heavier, and obviously it was tough for everybody, right? But
Yeah.
I didn't do any of the online performances or anything that a lot of musicians tried to do to keep themselves going. I just sort of hunkered down.
Yeah. So, how does it feel to have this new album out?
Feels great. It's been a few years in the process, so it's nice to finally have it done and out in the world and having people react to it.
So, what were the artistic forces that went into this release?
Well, the first force was the trumpet player. I wanted to work with the trumpet player, and I had talked to him about doing a project together, 5, 6, 7 years ago, maybe, and finally got it around. Most of the music I kind of wrote during the pandemic when we were all kind of locked down. So half of it was written during the pandemic, and then the other half was written sort of as we were coming out of the pandemic and the world was returning to normal and we were starting to gig again and try and get people out to gigs and all that sort of stuff. And the final end of the project really came together because I had a couple nights at the jazz club in town and I needed to have a band. And I sort of asked these guys and they were all available. And I said, well, would you be available to record the tunes a couple days later? And it sort of all came together in one afternoon for me. I got the three guys hired and booked for the gig and the recording session. So it was that part of it kind of ended up being easy.
So, what are you hoping the listener gets from this album?
I hope they just get a nice album that they can put on and listen to and it doesn't disrupt them. They can dig in and listen to it if they want and find lots of interesting things in there. But it can also be an album that is just on in the background and is a beautiful thing to have on. So I hope it can kind of fulfill both worlds. An album that can just be on during dinner or something like that. But it's also an album you can sit down and listen to and go, wow, that guy's a really great player, or that's a nice tune, or whatever the case is, right?
Yeah, for sure. So, how did this journey into the music and jazz, how did it happen for you?
Well, my older brother and sister played instruments and were in band programs when I was a kid, so I naturally kind of wanted to follow them and get into band programs, which I did. I went through junior high and high school band programs. But the real turning point for me was I saw Miles Davis live, Halloween night, 1984. And I went into that concert one person and I came out of it a different person. I suddenly understood how deep it could all go, kind of, I guess. And that's when the compass kind of changed and started pointing in music's direction a lot more seriously, for sure.
Who was he playing with? What was he doing?
That was early '80s. So that would have been I think Schofield was on guitar, Bob Berg on sax, Al Foster on drums, Mino Cinello percussion, and I think Daryl Jones was on bass at the time.
Okay,
So it's sort
interesting.
of the second reiteration of his comeback band in the early
Yeah,
'80s. Yeah,
that's interesting. I'm reading a book called Three Shades of Blue that kind of analyzes the kind of blue session, but it really follows the lineage of Coltrane, Miles, and Bill Evans. And I'm
yeah,
really getting into that part right now where Miles was kind of, saying he was going to retire and then he would go back and he went back and forth and just kind of how he was reinventing all of it. So that's fascinating to see
yeah,
him at that point because that was probably before he hit that arc before the end. Um,
yeah, yeah. His tone wasn't quite back yet, but the music was so intense, and I was 17 or something at the time, so it was just like you remember that old Max L commercial with the guy's hair getting
yeah,
blown back, and that's what it felt like, right? That's what
yeah,
that concert was to me. So
right on.
that was
So
cool.
what do you like the best about being a professional musician? What gets you motivated every day?
Um, Well, I really enjoy playing my instruments. That's one thing. Like I enjoy getting on and practicing and playing my instruments. So that's probably the biggest thing is just the joy of playing the instruments. But I mean, I think we all kind of get in music for audience feedback in a way, right? Like
Yeah.
it's pretty thrilling when you play a show and the audience stands up and roars and reacts. And I mean, obviously that's not jazz shows usually very often, but
Yeah.
I do other work as well. I do a lot of shows and stuff that does get that immense audience reaction back. So I really like that from a bigger sense. In a smaller sense, especially as a composer, if a musician says to me after they've played their tune, yeah, man, great tune. That was a fun tune to play. To me, that's the top rung of the ladder there. If a musician enjoys playing your compositions as a jazz person, to me, that's sort of the top compliment you can get.
So who were early influences for you? Albums, players, who really kind of swayed you?
Um, Kind of one of the first saxophone players I ever listened to, oddly enough, was Grover Washington Jr. He had a great album out in the '80s. I think Marcus Miller produced it called Wine Light, and it had just the two of us on with Bill Withers. That song was on there, and so he was sort of the first guy that I sort of started trying to copy licks a little bit. And then in high school, when we sort of discovered Miles Davis, the sax players that went along with that, Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley, and I think George Coleman was on the live album I had and stuff like that. So Miles probably was the biggest early influence on me.
So why do you love jazz?
Um, for me, the most thrilling thing in music is the reaction of humans. So modern music that's all very made on computers and stuff, it doesn't, I mean, I like it, but it doesn't thrill me in the same way as hearing human interaction within the music. So what I like about jazz so much is the human interaction, right? There's something happens and the others react to it. And it's the flow of that, and it's the fact that you're flowing with ideas in spontaneous time. It's not going to be the same every time. Obviously you have licks and tricks that you use, but generally every performance of a song is different in jazz, and I really like that. You never know really where it's going to head, and even if you swap out one player from a group, that one player difference changes everything in the music when you play the music that time. So I like the reactionary aspect of it, and the fact that it always kind of changes. It's not the same thing every time.
So what's going on with you as far as live shows? Anything coming up? The warm months are upon us. What's happening?
Yeah, there's lots of stuff coming up in the next few months. My release show is, what day is today? Tuesday. So we're doing a release show Thursday night here in town,
Okay.
and gonna release the album. It was officially released last week, but that's the show we're gonna do. And we'll make sure we get some good vid of stuff of that. Got a couple other gigs in the jazz clubs and stuff over the next few months in town here, and then lots of other sort of corporate work and show work and stuff like that I do as well. So it's
So final question for you here is everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, but you run the show. What's
yeah.
your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I like to think of myself first as a composer. I find the thrill of composing a tune and presenting it to musicians, and the journey of from hearing it in your head and trying to pound it out on a piano or an instrument, and then taking it to the musicians and hearing what they do, and then presenting it to an audience and hearing that reaction. So for me, composing is sort of my biggest thrill in music. And then playing my horns is sort of secondary. I consider myself a pretty decent saxophone player. I work at it. So, being a competent player is also good composer, competent player, I guess I'd say about myself.
So the best thing to do out there for anybody is to actually pick up this album. Where's the best place to get it? Learn about any of the live shows that you have coming up, anything about your world, where should they go?
Yeah, I have a website, scottdouglasmarshall.com, which has all the info on it. Bandcamp, of course, the album's up on Bandcamp. That's probably the best place to get it. You got your choice of how you can get it there. You can get WAV files or smaller files or higher def files on Bandcamp. So Bandcamp's always great, and of course, it's available on all the streaming platforms that are out there. So,
Right on, man. This has
yeah.
been wonderful. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. Best of luck with the album and everything as it goes along.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And before